Today is Good Friday, but I want to start by telling you of something I heard about a few months ago when BBC Radio broadcast the very moving story of Nadim Ednam Laperouse, the successful businessman who tragically lost his daughter Natasha back in 2016 after she suffered an allergic reaction to a sesame seed in a baguette bought from Pret-a-Manger. Nadim and his wife have since successfully campaigned for a new law on the labelling of food. But what I found particularly moving about that broadcast was the personal account from Nadim of his experience as he held his dying daughter, an experience which changed his life. You see, at that time, although his daughter Natasha was a Christian, Nadim himself was an atheist. But in the months after her death, Nadim's perspective on life changed, and he came to put his faith in God. He says he still has grief, but he's not a broken or unhappy man. I'm happy, really, that I feel at one with God, he said. I know we've been to a very low place. It couldn't get worse. But in that moment, God has lifted us and carried us forward. God can even bring good out of tragedy. And that's nowhere more true than in the events of Good Friday. But it's a strange name, isn't it, Good Friday? Why is it called Good Friday? Especially strange when you consider that it commemorates such a traumatic event as the execution of Jesus Christ on a brutal Roman cross. But perhaps it's called good because, amazingly, God brings good out of evil. There's one fascinating detail that's recorded by the Gospel writers that I hadn't thought about much until recently. You see, as Jesus carried the cross towards the place of execution, the soldiers press-ganged a passer-by to carry his cross. I guess Jesus had collapsed after the brutal beating that he'd already suffered. And interestingly, we're told the name of the man who carried the cross, Simon of Cyrene. Mark's Gospel even adds that he was the father of Alexander and Rufus. We know nothing more about this man apart from his name and the name of his two sons. But why include the detail of those names at all? My guess is that when the Gospels were written down, perhaps 30 or so years later, Simon of Cyrene and his family were well known to some of the first readers. Although we can't be sure, it could well be that they were well known because they were prominent members of the early church. I imagine that Simon of Cyrene was forced to carry the cross for Jesus, and as he did so, he became a witness to the death of Jesus on the cross, and how he spoke to that criminal, and how Jesus spoke to that criminal next to him. Today you will be with me in paradise, Jesus said. Simon can't help but being a witness to those 3 hours of darkness, from noon until 3 o'clock. Well, my guess is the traumatic events of that day changed the life of Simon. For many people in the world, we live in an extremely traumatic time. The pandemic has taken the lives of thousands of people and threatens to take the life of thousands more. Lives have been turned upside down, businesses devastated, and many families are living with fear or even grief. For virtually everyone, our normal life has been challenged. For some, there's been an increasing awareness of our human frailty, that none of us is invincible. Perhaps it has caused us to challenge what's really important in our life. But in the midst of bad news, we also hear of the self-sacrificial service of those on the front line of the fight against the virus. And it is, of course, the events of the first Good Friday that provide us with the ultimate example of self-sacrifice and God bringing good out of evil. The death and resurrection of Jesus has transformed the world. It's transformed the world as people realize that his death was in our place, that we can be forgiven and be restored to new life with God. You see, as men and women live out that life of forgiveness, love and self-sacrifice, the message of the cross becomes contagious in the best sense of the word. I hope that for you the current crisis is not proving as traumatic as the events Simon of Cyrene witnessed on that first Good Friday, or as witnessed by Nadim Adnan Laperouse when he lost his daughter. But yet I do pray that on this very difficult bank holiday, this very different bank holiday weekend, we may be able to reflect on the years of 2,000 years ago, which were so important that our government, many years ago, assigned 2 bank holidays to the same weekend. It's my hunch that God transformed the life of Simon of Cyrene through those unexpected traumatic events nearly 2,000 years ago. And it's my prayer that even through this traumatic time in world history, God will be working for good in your life, drawing you closer to Him. Amen.